One thing that's come up on this gamer stuff, I want to highlight your tweet here because you included this great video by Gundams here. Is stuff like this we find out the government and Department of Homeland Security spends $750,000 on a PowerPoint that hates on gamers. Like the government is really wrapped up in a lot of this shit, especially with these grants that give these companies. We find out like Sweet Baby. I guarantee you, Black Girls
Yep.
Gamers, all of those websites do that.
Well, and that's the answer to where does the money come from, right? It's like, how can they afford to do this stuff that clearly doesn't make any money? That's the answer, right? But how do we stop it? That's the big question. And that's what I love about the gaming community is it's so focused that it can actually shift things real quick, unlike any other, fandom that we have. We
I
could be
think
struggling for the next 5-10
that's
years as
why
far as
it's a
movies and
threat.
stuff go. Yeah.
That's
They
why it's
they
a threat.
bury
And
all
Savvy
this.
has done a lot of work here leading up to Gundam's video, I think, and
Yeah.
and a lot of research into where these grants are going, who's doing them. And it's just a couple of key players, really, researchers that are making money off this for basically no work.
Do you want to talk about that,
Right.
Savvy, and what you've learned? And
Yeah, so I
downloaded?
actually just also linked you a part because the fact that conservative specifically was brought up, I wanted to show language that is put on the EGRN's website, which is the Extremism and Gaming Research Network, which is what I broke
Cool.
down so much. But so on their primary research tab, their first look into mobilizing gamers was actually in Brazil for their elections. And they have a specific paragraph in there. It's the third one down where they specifically state in these spaces conservative and extremist voices can
Mm.
operate under the radar, benefiting from less rigorous monitoring and moderation compared to more established social media or gaming platforms. So at the time when this was written, Twitter was still twittering and conservative voices were still shut down. The EGRN is who I ended up finding through Dr. Cowart, thanks to her writing the blog post on Take This, referencing the Kotaku article. The whole reason why I even looked into any of this to begin with is because randomly on their website, they would state that they were funded by DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security. Now, they got funded a year ago, and they were prepping for that a year in advance as well. But what they fail to mention whenever they list that on random parts of their website is that it's actually for a specific research grant that they partnered with Middlebury College and Logically AI. Now, Logically AI is a British born company that actually monitors misinformation in elections. And they had a hand in the 2020 elections here in the States. They are also India's #1 fact checker, apparently, according to the Wikipedia, and they are trying to reshape the misinformation sphere by using AI and a human eye. So they don't really elaborate too much on how they do that, what specifically they're targeting. But it's just interesting that a mental health organization is partnering with election interference, essentially, and a university that studies extremism, or one of the parts of the university that study extremist and terrorist recruitment. I've got the 3-minute video that kind of shows all of this, but the important thing to note is that when you apply for government funding, you know what you're doing and you have to use very specific language. So even though they're a mental health organization, they're still claiming that, oh, we need to look into extremism and terrorist recruitment specifically because it's an ongoing threat when it's not. The people who Dr. Cowart and some of the others have actually written articles previously, which I've read, and they all acknowledge that there's no evidence of any of this going on. But the key takeaway is in order to continue to get government funding, you have to go back to the government with proven results. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
how you get the results, what the results actually are, but you have to go to them and say, look, here's what we found. And I'll just finish it off with this thought. I'm sorry, it's so much information.
No, go
But
ahead.
the way that they're collecting information is through self-reporting and through Google Forms. And so they don't leave any room for follow-up because they state that it's anonymous. And what they're going to do, because I've seen how sociologists work. I'm a biology major, so I know how actual research goes, but these people we make fun of. What they've done is basically somebody can say, hey, somebody called me the F word in a Call of Duty lobby. So this is evidence of targeted harassment and extremism. And all they're going to do is put down a tick and say, all right, here's one person who experienced that. And they're going to keep going until they find a specific number that'll look good to the government. So that way they can then get more funding for the following year. Because
This is
year,
the game.
yeah.
This is the game that a lot of these social science people do. A
Yep.
lot of the shit they do actually can't even you can't replicate it.
Nope.
So
Not in
like
the
most of the time the shit they do, someone else tries to do it, which is that's how you're supposed to actually do this. Like science should actually hold up when someone else does it. And their shit over half the time, unless they fix this, don't replicate. Which and they get a lot of money. They get grants up the ass. The whole college system is this big a big hustle. Actually,
It's a
really
pseudoscience grift.
It's a hustle to get people in, and it's a hustle with what the teachers do. Like all these departments they get tons of government money, and for almost nothing. You really, as long as you're good at paperwork, you could probably get some money.
Well, it goes back years. I mean, it's not just gaming. It's not. They've been doing this with. They've been doing this with climate science for a long time. I mean, that's how all of that got started. Here's a grant. We need you to research something. We need you to deliver a specific outcome that proves a theory that we have. Well, if you don't do that, guess what? The money's going to dry up. So what it's now become a $10 billion a year industry of climate science is all based around that. And it's the same thing with, and you're right, Flash, this is part of the college hustle now, where money just goes to get. Why do you think they have all these departments that effectively do nothing, serve no actual commercial viable purpose? It's just because there's a lot of government money that gets thrown in there, and if you don't use it, have
you seen some of the shit that gets funded? There's literally
it
was something ridiculous, like how much you could hit somebody in the balls or something. I don't think that was actually what it was, but it was something equivalently stupid.
Oh, they granted, what was it, like 25 million
Yeah.
to find out the difference between men and women 10 years ago.
Well, look at this example that got
Men
brought
are
up.
from Mars.
Find a woman.
$750,000 for that gaming PowerPoint.
Yeah.
There's something more insidious here, though. I think that there's a couple of opportunist researchers here that have discovered that the government will fund this stuff, and it actually goes back, I think, to probably the original Gamergate, the original meme war, and where you had Kate Edwards come in. She was one of the researchers at Microsoft on this sort of sociological gaming stuff. And listen, for better or for worse, people actually believe that gamers skewed the election, right? This is thrown around a lot, that Gamergate, they blame the election of Trump on Gamergate. That has actually happened multiple times. And while that's a funny meme, there is some truth to that in this sense. Gamergate was the first time that a significant portion of the population was woken up to the fact that their news was being controlled. And I was very naive. I thought that journalists were, game journalists could be appealed to with logic and reason. I had a whole petition saying, hey, let's come together. Let's not let the Jack Thompsons of the world ruin gaming. Let's figure this out. And I learned very quickly as I saw real life events unfold with Gamergate on one hand and how it was reported on the other hand. That was an eye opener. And then we appealed that to the mainstream journalists. We said, hey, this is an ethics violation. And we actually, went to someone who was, I think, a chair of the ethics, society for mainstream journalism, and, got a little bit of traction there, but didn't get very far.
Breitbart was kind of involved too, right? They were
they were the only ones willing to give it a voice, and there was an opportunistic motive there. But the people but that made Breitbart huge, right? It propelled them on a political trajectory that ended up in the White House.
A lot of people started following this space politically because of people like Milo and like myself. I was like, who the hell is this guy? And then I was like, wait a minute, what is this weird political niche stuff that's happening, and then it's just,
So
then
there's
it's
a
spiraled
direct
into
line.
yeah.
There's a
It
direct
is.
line to
It is a
people
direct
in the
line.
White House all
Yep.
the way to Gamergate. And this freaks out government. And that's why there is funding for stuff like this, because they don't want people to know that their news is controlled. They don't want people to know that, there's a significant portion of people who have woken up. And that's the threat. And that's why the government's very interested in funding these sort of things.